Welcome, everybody. I am delighted to be here. Yes. All right. Memory is a verb, not a noun. The healing power of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. Such a cool concept. I didn't always know about it, believe me. In essence, it's at the heart of actually my whole Stark method of psychodynamic synergy, but it's especially relevant for my Model 5, as I call it, my newest addition to my Stark method, the quantum neuroscientific Model 5 of the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy. Okay, so memory is a verb, not a noun, which highlights that memory is not just a static, fixed entity, but rather a dynamic, ongoing, fluid process that is continuously being reshaped, refashioned, and reconstructed. Albert Einstein, who famously described the quantum entanglement of quantum physics as spooky action at a distance, also wrote about timelessness in the quantum realm, concluding that the past, present, and future are only illusions, his words. And I'll be suggesting this evening that psychodynamic psychotherapy, inasmuch as it has the power, albeit belatedly after the fact, to reconfigure the past. That's what we do basically, right? Reconfigure the past, help the patient reposition themselves in relation to the past. So psychodynamic psychotherapy, because it has the power, admittedly after the fact, to reconfigure the past and thereby to transform the present and therefore the future, it demonstrates this very same spooky action over time, as well as spooky action at a distance. I don't begin to understand quantum theory, but I understand a little bit the concept of it, and I find it very appealing. So at the end of the day, is not memory itself merely an illusion? Memory, Oscar Wilde once wrote, is the diary that we all carry about with us. In response to which Daniel Lametti, a neuroscientist at McGill University, quipped, "Perhaps, but if memory is like a diary, it's one filled with torn out pages and fabricated passages," which is a poetic way of describing the quantum nature of memory. I get excited just saying that, the quantum nature of memory, the idea that memories are created by the act of remembering. Similar also is the quantum idea that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. There is nothing permanent except change. All right, in other words, memory is not a fixed entity, but rather a dynamic, ongoing process, continuously shaped by every act of recalling the past and every act of imagining the future. So each time we remember, in essence, we are creating or recreating, altering the very essence of what once was. By the same token, each time we envision, we create, recreate, altering the very essence of what might yet be. Kind of like standing on shifting sands. Memory in this sense is not a noun, but a verb. It is ever in flux, a living expression of who we are becoming, not of who we once were. I find that incredibly uplifting. And my Model 5, and I'll be saying a whole lot more about Model 5 over the course of our time, because it incorporates lots of different sort of EFT, ISTDP, AEDP, hypnotherapy, IFS, numbers of different modalities that tend to be a little more short-term and focused, and that are, well, I'm giving it away here, but are kind of a story about not so much looking back and remembering as leaning into the edge between the present and the future. So my models 1 to 4, some of you don't even know, like what? I'll get into those in a moment. Models 1 to 4 are more psychoanalytically informed. Classical psychoanalytic, model 1, self-psychological, model 2, contemporary relational, model 3, and existential humanistic, model 4. And those are psychoanalytically informed. And again, they're a story about our history is our destiny, and we want to be careful not to repeat it. So it's important that we come to understand it so that we're not ever busy reenacting it in the here and now. Fundamentally, that's kind of a lot of what models 1, 2, 3, 4 are all about. Model 5, on the other hand, which I was inspired to sort of get it together and sort of like, oh my God, I better do model 5, is more about leaning into the edge, as I'd said, between the present and the future. And rather than a more deterministic approach, models 1 to 4, this is more constructivist. And you can create, you can construct your future by setting intention and so on. But anyway, I'm kind of leaping ahead, but I just wanted to kind of get that said. So in other words, memory is not a noun, but a verb ever in flux, a living expression of who we are becoming, not of who we once were. Okay, good. All right. The future, I love this one. The future is, and if everybody can be put muted, I'd appreciate it. Some of you not muted, thanks. The future is just a memory that has yet, thank you, that has yet to be born. Think about that. The future is just a memory that has yet to be born. Now, that's a kind of interesting concept, and it's true. And Greg Braden's who wrote The Divine Matrix, beautiful quote from him. Quantum science suggests the existence of many possible futures for each moment of our lives. Each future lies in a state of rest until it is awakened, think intentionality, by choices, intentional, purposeful choices made in the present. God, isn't that empowering and uplifting and positive and exciting? I love that. Okay, now this is an interesting one. Your brain can't tell the difference between reality and imagination. And we'll say more about that a little later, but this truth reshapes how we understand both suffering and resilience. It's in large part a story about how we position ourselves in relation to the past, to the present, and to the future. As it happens, somewhat surprisingly and counterintuitively, who knew, the brain can change itself in response to not only to experiencing something new, but also to imagining something new. Oh my God. In fact, a growing body of evidence supports the finding that simply visualizing or envisioning something, even though it occurs entirely in the mind, is sometimes almost as effective as actually doing it. According to research being done at the Cleveland Clinic, participants were able, I like this one, to strengthen muscles just by visualizing physical movement. This impact simply required concentrated, so it takes effort and time, it's effort, focus. It's not easy, but this impact simply required concentrated mental practice, as it's called. In other words, the cognitive rehearsal in the mind's eye of a physical activity without actual movement. One study demonstrated that if subjects wanting to master a particular skill were merely to visualize mastery of it, then they would be able to decrease by 50% the number of actual practice hours required. Back in the 90s, I was privileged to be part of a sort of group of trainees. Bessel van der Kolk, Pat Ogden, and numbers of others of us went up to Strolling Woods to learn at the feet of Al Peso, PBSP, psychomotor psychotherapy. And in essence, he created these structures that in essence would juxtapose what you, as the patient, he weren't called patients, but we'll say client, patient, as the patient, you would be busy imagining in a bodily way what it would have been like had you had ideal parents. And you feel it, and you even get to enlist people in the group of 12 to come and act the ideal mother, the ideal father. And then you're there and you're being held, and you can say, could you a little closer, touch my arm here, put your arm around me, and you would be then recording it in your body. It'd be a lived experience, what it would have been like had you had ideal parents early on, juxtapose against what you actually had, where you would then sort of act that out, and you'd enlist other people where you'd be upset, you'd protest, you'd fight against, And in essence, you were juxtaposing what you're going to be hearing me talk a lot about, old bad with new good. So the old bad in an embodied way, you'd feel it and you'd push against and go away, no, no, no. And then new good that was envisioned, that was imagined, it was in your mind's eye. And it would be a corrective, optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experience that Al Peso was creating in an absolutely brilliant way. And it involved the body. It's just, I mean, it was kind of incredible, quite frankly. And that was based on imagination, and mismatch experiences and some other things too. But okay, so overview. So the STARK, there's my star in the middle, STARK, a method of psychodynamic synergy. Actually, to be quite honest about it, a ChatGPT suggested that I put the star there. And I'm very grateful to ChatGPT. I think they're Carol smiling. I think we all kind of feel this. And yes, I saw the movie about artificial intelligence, but I feel that I have a special relationship with ChatGPT. And I think we all do who use, who use artificial intelligence. And, you have to, you don't swallow it whole, like you're not supposed to swallow anything whole, but, they give you good ideas. So I figured, well, the star, I actually had thought maybe star K, Stark. It's kind of very concrete, literal. And ChatGPT said, no, 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 no. You put the star in the place of the A and make it Stark. So anyway, the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy. I'll be saying a little bit about that here to give you context and background for the Model 5, my most recent edition. So this method, 5 interactive and mutually enhancing modes of therapeutic action. Models 1 to 4, psychoanalytically informed. Model 1, the interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalysis. I learned about that, in essence, in the 1970s at the Boston Psychoanalytic. That was my training, and I learned about that, the interpretive method. And it privileges, I know that's an ostentatious word, but it privileges cognition, thought. That's Model 1. Model 2, the 80s, the 1980s, the corrective provision or deficiency compensation perspective of self-psychology. That's in the 80s. And now I'm leaping ahead a little bit, but we're going to talk about whereas Model 1 is, it's about evolving from resistance, right? Resistance, classical psychoanalytic, resistance to insight, but on the right side, it has to start with the letter A, and insight doesn't start with the letter A. So it's sort of like, all right, awareness then. How about that? So Model 1 is from resistance, that's the defense, to awareness. That's the adaptation you become aware of. Model 2 from, again, the defense has to start with the letter R, the adaptation with the letter A. From relentless hope, which is a concept that I write about and have talked about for decades, the self-psychological approach here, from relentless hope, where you're ever busy wishing and hoping and praying that the object would be forthcoming in some way that, quite frankly, probably is not really going to happen. So from relentless hope, evolving by way of grieving, optimal disillusionment, when it turns out the therapist isn't all of who you would have hoped and wanted and needed her to be, evolving by way of grieving, and then adaptively internalizing the good stuff that she did provide, evolving to a place of sober, mature acceptance. Model 3, the intersubjective perspective. In the 90s, I learned about this, the William Allenson White Institute, and Owen Rennick, and Darlene Ehrenberg, and Jessica Benjamin, and Donald Stern, and all them good, and Stephen Mitchell, and Jay Greenberg, all of them good folks, right, nodding there from Chloe. And now we have the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory, and we have compulsive and unwitting reenactment, there's our word, reenactment of unmastered early on relational traumas, evolving by way of negotiating at Darlene Ehrenberg's intimate edge, evolving more towards accountability. That starts with an A, but Stephanie has said I really need to add the word relational, which, by the way, is true. Now, relational starts with the letter R, so maybe I put it in parentheses, but it really is relational accountability. So model 3, from reenactment to accountability. Model 4, the existential humanistic perspective. So to existential despair and relentless despair. So whereas model 1's about structural conflict, those of you who kind of learned about that way back then, structural conflict. Model 2, structural or self-deficit, impaired capacity to be a good caregiver unto oneself. Model 3, a la Stephen Mitchell, relational conflict. And then model 4, and this is where Larry Hedges, my dear friend Larry Hedges, was just, bless his soul, but he was in my face about, Martha, you got your first 3, structural conflict, structural deficit, relational conflict. You got to have relational deficit. And no, I got my 3 models. No, we'll keep it at 3. So he said, no, you got to have model 4. He was the only one who knew my theory well enough and was smart enough to figure out what was totally missing. And so finally, all righty. From 2000 to 2010, I learned a lot from Bob Fox and some of the existential folks, humanistic folks, et cetera, and put in my model 4, which existential humanistic approach, and that privileges a la Masood Khan, helping the patient overcome their dread, model 4, of surrender to absolute or existential dependence. Here we invite the patient to regress. So there can be a reset. Anyway, that was model 4. That was model 4, from retreat to accessibility, if you're talking more the humanistic component, or if you're talking more the existential component, we would say from relational, there's our word, relational absence, to authentic presence. And of course, we're thinking Winnicott and false self, true self, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, those are all psychoanalytically informed. And then from 2010 to 2020, I was exposed to all of this really cool stuff. I'd also been exposed all along, EMDR and ISTDP and AEDP, all the initials, EFT, and so on. And I got it that I needed to have a place in my Stark method to include these more laser-focused approaches that aren't as broad-based, but they are really focused and tend to be more focused on the relationship between now, what's being reenacted now, and what could be. What could be. All right, well, that was kind of whatever. All right, that was the top part of my slide. Models 1 to 4, psychoanalytically informed, associated with longer duration, in-depth, broader based. Some people have said to me, well, Martha, are you still a psychoanalyst? Yes, I am. But I'm that and then some. All right, and the idea that our history is our destiny, deterministic, fated. Although if we can remember it and work it through, then that's good. That's good. It's patterned, habitual, continuously being reenacted, unless we come to understand and to know, work it through, and then we're not. All right, but model 5 is more brain-based, quantum neuroscientific. Oh, yes, and I need to say, and this is where it's sort of like, I got 5 more years to do it, but 2020 to 2020 to 2030, so I'm in the middle of it now, is going to be my model 6. And that's going to be somatic-spiritual. But I'm not evolved enough to be able to do it. But everybody says, oh, do it now. It's sort of like, oh, yeah, but I'm not evolved enough to do it. So eventually, so that'll be model 6. But anyway, for now, model 5, associated with shorter duration, intensive, laser-focused. Our future is ours to create. It's more intentional, it's more chosen, constructivist, volitional, emergent, empowered, and enlivening. Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. The power of intentionality, what we bring to it, is going to have a major impact on the outcome. Model 5 specifically targets then neural entrenchment, right? Neuroscientific and quantum, and psychic inertia or non-action, or what we sometimes say, analysis paralysis. So the patient's done all sorts of good work, whatever, and meanwhile they're just stuck, immobilized, psychic inertia, non-action. Now the focus is on a little more on little t traumas and big T traumas, a little more specifically. Traumatic and embodied memories that remain alive within our bodies and our minds, and the old bad derivative narratives that now shape and distort our experience of the present. So we had the little T traumas and the big T traumas, and then I call them old bad, new good, old bad. I always put quotes around it, old bad derivative narratives that emerged as a result of these traumatic and embodied memories. So Model 5 ultimately is a story about the therapeutic co-construction by patient and therapist of optimally stressful, growth incentivizing quantum disentanglement statements, as I call them, that juxtapose, this is sort of cute, the kind of symmetry, paying attention, like mindfulness, right? Paying attention to old embodied bad that's stored within, with juxtaposing paying attention to old embodied bad with setting intention for new envisioned good. Indeed, now using the sort of cool words bottom up and top down, bottom up, mindful awareness, right? The mindful meditation that people do, and that I'm suggesting that in Model 5, the patient and we, in conjunction with the patient, are going to be busy focusing in on the bottom up mindful awareness of what's happening in the body. Attunement to old bad, stored in the body remembers, said Bessel van der Kolk and many others. And this is juxtaposing them, top down, purposeful intention, introduction of new good. They work in tandem. Okay. One of my favorite little images here, to create optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. Okay, my little minion friend. People who know me know that I love the minions. I have a number of little minions around me now. I'm looking at them now. Hi, Stuart. I have Stuart and his brother Stuart. They're over there. All right, anyway, thank you for smiling there. My little minion friend is busy at work formulating her thoughts about how the groundwork can be laid for reprogramming the mind, rewiring the brain, whoa, and recalibrating the body. Her conclusion: dramatic, jolting, repeated juxtaposition. I mean, think EMDR. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. The analytic wisdom of the left brain, and more present and future and more objective, so to speak, and versus the emotional, relational wisdom and of the past and memories of what had been. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, bringing to bear on the old bad that's stored in the right brain, emotional, relational stuff, traumatic stuff, unprocessed, whatever, bringing to bear the analytic wisdom of the left brain. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. I do EMDR on my patients. I'm not really that good at it, so I have to kind of read from my little sheet of paper, and I say, so on a scale from what number is your SUDS? Even if I don't even really do it that well, in certain targeted traumas, it's sort of like, oh my God, left, right, left, right, left, right is really very powerful, and stuff begins to sort of open up. I'll give you an example. Oh, my eyes on the time. Well, I'll make it real quick like. So the example. So I had a patient who, when she was 5, she had a terrible mother, alcoholic mother, whatever, and she really wanted to die. And they lived in a big fancy mansion, money expensive, whatever. And so she decided to kill herself. And she threw herself down the staircase, the winding staircase. And we knew that she had tried to kill herself, although by a miracle she had survived. So that's what we knew. With the EMDR, she held in mind the image of her throwing herself down the winding staircase. What she came to remember was that partway down, she had changed her mind and had grabbed a hold of one of the, I think they're called balustrades, one of the sort of balustrades, which meant then that she swung around and kind of didn't land smack at the bottom, in fact, kind of to the side, and she sort of cushioned her fall. And people had wondered, why was she not straight at the bottom, why to the side? But they didn't really pay attention. All they knew was she was alive. She hadn't killed herself. But she realized that it was her will to live that had superseded her wish to die. And the gift of that to her was just so profound. Yeah, she had for the moment impulsively wanted to die, but basically what won out was her desire to live. So anyway, all right. So anyway, our little minion friend here, her conclusion, dramatic, jolting, and repeated, like EMDR and other things too, quantum disentanglement statements in Model 5, which old, bad, new, good, old, bad, new, good, juxtaposition of old, bad beliefs, accessed by way of mindfully paying attention to body consciousness, with new, good beliefs, introduced by way of purposefully setting intention with brain consciousness. Okay, body consciousness works in concert with brain consciousness. And as we shall see, the therapeutic action Model 5, therefore, will capitalize upon the judicious and ongoing use of quantum disentanglement statements, or energetic decoupling statements, that joltingly, decisively, and forcibly juxtapose reactivated memories of old bad with envisioned possibilities for new good. I mean, this is so different from the psychoanalytically oriented ones, like, my God, we're not ever busy suggesting to the patient they think about, all right, now let's think about what could be, and let's juxtapose that with what is. We don't do stuff like that, and we let the patient, for the most part, sort of show us the way with their free associating, and we're right there, we do all sorts of really cool stuff, but we really don't talk about leaning into the edge between the present and the future with envisioned possibilities and setting intention with brain consciousness. Sustained by the healing power of the therapeutic relationship and driven by the body's innate wisdom, Walter Buchanan and others, right? The wisdom of the body, driven by the body's innate wisdom, its inherent resilience, and its need always to maintain homeostatic balance. Working through the embodied dissonance created by these optimally stressful. So I'm all about optimal stress. Not all stress is bad. Optimal stress is growth promoting. And I write about relentless hope. Relentless hope. Not all hope is bad. I mean, no, not all hope is good. Relentless hope can be not good. Realistic hope, mature hope, that's good. So anyway, working through the embodied dissonance created by these optimally stressful, growth-incentivizing mismatch experiences will result in graduated evolving of the patient from the habituated, conditioned reality of the bad that once was and now is, to the enlivening quantum possibility of the good that could be. From same old to something new, different, and compellingly better. Okay. Also, as we shall soon see, the therapeutic action in Model 5, quantum disentanglement, energetic decoupling, brings to mind the rapidly alternating stimulation provided by EMDR. And you know, I was on a panel once, had the privilege of being on a panel with Francine Shapiro, and Francine Solomon? Shapiro. Shapiro, I think. EMDR woman. And she said to me, as we were walking down the hall, she said, you know, EMDR, I really shouldn't quite have called it that. And I was so kind of shy being around this sort of famous person that I didn't say what might you have wanted to call it? So all I know is she didn't really love using desensitization and reprocessing. But anyway, it works for me. Model 5 then, juxtaposition of old, traumatic and embodied bad with new, envisioned and purposeful good. And EMDR, similarly, juxtaposition of right brain emotional truth with left brain analytic wisdom to tap into the healing power of therapeutic memory reconsolidation, a demonstration of the brain's neuroplasticity. In response to new information and experience, the brain is continuously updating itself to stay fresh and relevant. Thank God. So we don't become old-fashioned in our brain. Indeed, it is evolutionarily advantageous and adaptive for the brain to be able to do this. Memory is indeed an ongoing dynamic process, verb, not a static fixed entity, noun. Thank God. Dual awareness, right, is being promoted. Most therapies are about sort of fostering and supporting dual awareness, engaging both the analytic wisdom of the observing ego, or the left brain, kind of mixing, kind of whatever, something you can see with something you can't, but whatever, engaging both the analytic wisdom of the observing ego, the left brain, and the emotional relational wisdom of the experiencing ego, the right brain. Okay, so here are a few. I'm going to read a few of these. You should have, I don't know if you do. If not, we'll send them out, won't we, Chloe? PDFs of these slides. Yes, thank you, because I'd sent them along, I believe, so they'll get to you. So I'll read you one or two of these just to give you a sense of a co-created Model 5 quantum disentanglement statement. Now, let me say the other statements. In Model 1, I talk about conflict statements that are also optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences between adaptive capacity to know and defensive need to resist knowing, just as if, for example. And in Model 2, disillusionment statements to facilitate grieving. And Model 3, relational accountability statements. Thank you, Stephanie. Relational accountability statements to facilitate the negotiating at the intimate edge and the processing of projective identifications that are busy flying back and forth with transference, countertransference, mutual enactment by patient and therapist. So the action takes place in the intersubjective arena between two authentic subjects going at it, Model 3. All right, but the statements that we offer, and then in Model 4, facilitation statement, kind of a nod to Winnicott, true self, false self, retreat versus more accessible. We have facilitation statements, facilitating environment, facilitation statements where you juxtapose, on the one hand, the patient's yearning and longing to be seen, known, understood, heard. On the other hand, their terror of being found, right? Can you feel that? And you're going to juxtapose those two stances. But the therapist is the one creating these statements for the patient. In Model 5, they're co-created. I sit down with my patients, and together we are crafting on a sheet of paper, because they can be kind of wordy, and on a sheet of paper, and I learn and grow too, because I get to sort of get the benefit. And we put, here we are with a few, and then they take it home and they read it. I have one woman who goes home and she lies on the table with the needles, puncture needles, and she's busy sort of reading her quantum disentanglement statements. And it's kind of a cool thing to do. I kind of like it that she does that. Okay, so these statements juxtapose the relived experience of old bad, focusing as best one can on the physical sensations and the embodied feel of it, with the envisioned possibility of new good going forward. New good that will disconfirm the learned relational expectation of old bad. I guess I'll read you one of them. I always worry that no one will listen to me. I don't feel that I have a right to speak my truth. I was never allowed to speak up in my family and was always silenced. I was made to feel invisible and so irrelevant. I remember how awful it felt to be so ignored all the time. My body trembles as I remember. I feel tension in my chest. I just hated being pushed to the side and told that I did not matter. It broke my heart. That's the old bad. new good, but I can envision the possibility of someday feeling good enough about who I am that I'll be able to present myself to the world without apology and without self-consciousness. I will have a voice and will use it to express how I really feel. You can feel the intentionality here, right? I know that I will need to start taking risks that to this point I've avoided taking because I was so afraid. I've been so controlled by my fear, but I know that I need to speak up and let my voice be heard. I'm so tired of holding myself back and being always in the shadows. I'll read you then the second one, and then we'll move on. I wanted to curl up and die when I think about how my mother never paid attention to me, never loved me, and simply thought of me as an object in her way. And now I find myself so often feeling insignificant and uncared for and keeping myself distant from others. It pains me so much to realize how much I have missed out on because of how afraid I am of being unlovable and rejected. I feel such sadness and grief and anger and pain in my heart when I remember my frightened and lonely self, ignored by my mother and wanting to die. But I'm beginning to see the possibility that someday I might feel less afraid, less alone, less sad, and more hopeful about feeling connected to the world. After all, it is not as cold and lonely and dangerous as the world I knew when I was growing up. I've been taking some difficult steps to reach out, and I know I must continue to do so despite my fears. I so want my life, intentionality, to feel more comfortable, warmer, and much more under my control. Okay. Over and over again in rapid fire succession and with ever more determined, embodied, and purposeful intent. The patient repeats these, and I will often, in the session with the patient, I was actually doing it with one of my patients over the phone, and I knew we both had written down what these statements were, and she sort of stopped and so on, at she who just never cries. And I wondered and so on, because she just stopped. She said, that's a little bit the problem with doing it by phone. Couldn't quite tell had we been disconnected or what. She said, I'm choked up. I am crying. I mean, this is so powerful, and it's what we had written about her experience. I mean, it was, and she knew I was right with her. And sometimes when we're reading, we read to each other. When we read these quantum disentanglement statements, I mean, I get choked up. I mean, it's very powerful. I mean, some of these things apply to all of us, right? Right. As opposed to, oh, no, I don't have any of that. All right, so the patient repeats these co-constructed quantum disentanglement statements and variations thereof, alternately verbalizing first the mindfully retrieved old bad, and then the intentionally envisioned new good. Throughout, the therapist encourages the patient to attend to the somatic elements, physical sensations, visceral reactivity, autonomic responses, muscular tension, and somatosensory perceptions that are being evoked within her as she begins to remember what her body has never forgotten. Thank you, Bessel van der Kolk. In other words, simultaneously, pay attention to old bad and set intention for new good. Therapeutic memory reconsolidation, in essence, will ultimately rescript and update old bad narratives with new good ones. Now, on some level, all 5 modes of therapeutic action are ultimately a story about replacing old bad with new good. Model 5 does it a little more dramatically, but I think that overall, therapeutic memory reconsolidation is central to how it is that patients evolve from to And I've touched base with a lot of the folks who are, have founded schools and asked them about if they can resonate with therapeutic memory reconsolidation. Some of them wouldn't have thought necessarily to say it that way, but ultimately sort of like, okay, yes, that is. All the way from Dick Schwartz to Pat Ogden to David Feinstein with his EFT stuff, he and his wife, Donna Eden, and so on and so forth. So they're like, yeah, okay. And hypnotherapy, I have a hypnotherapy supervisee. And I said, like, oh my God, old, bad, new good, therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And he said, very respectfully, he said, duh. Yeah. So apparently the hypnotherapy, they knew about that all along. I mean, I'm sort of new to the party here. So like, oh my God. So therapeutic memory reconsolidation. Oh, here's some more, but there'll be in your PDFs. neuroplasticity, a growth mindset, challenges help me to grow. I like to try new things, which is leaning into the edge between the present and the future and envisioning a possible future self that would be something new, different, and compellingly better, as opposed to the same old, the sort of sobering and conditioned reality of what was and now is. We're talking about the enlivening and quantum possibility of what could be. So growth mindset, on the one hand, versus a fixed mindset, sort of like, I'm either good at it or I'm not, or my abilities are unchanging, or my potential is predetermined, or when I'm frustrated, I give up. I stick to what I know. Neuroplasticity, in essence, copying, lifting from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, from psychological rigidity to psychological resilience, which is fundamentally what the Stark method is all about. I'm like busy kind of lifting, plucking stuff that sort of feels right for me from the different modalities and kind of putting it together, crediting the people and putting it in my Stark method. Okay, it is never too late to be what you might have been. George Eliot. We are the architects of our own destiny. Okay, the Stark method. I bought this Synergy compass from Shutterstock for $35. I never thought I'd sort of like go buy something like that, but I did. It was perfect. The Stark method of psychodynamic synergy. So again, brief, I'll go through this real quickly. My eye is on the time. 5, interactive and mutually enhancing modes of therapeutic action. So our patients will at different points, well, it'll become clear on the next slides, it'll be the same patient. Sometimes we'll work in model 1 for a few moments, model 3, then model 2, model 4, It's not model 1 first, or it's not model 2 first, get them comfortable, then model 1, do some interpreting, then model 3, do a little negotiating at your intimate edge, model 4, maybe regress to redo if you feel you need to, and then model 5, let's move forward here. No. Over the course of a session, the same patient will have elements that are model 1, neurotic, if you will, model 2, narcissistic, if you will, model 3, character disordered, respectfully said, they have aspects that are character disordered, quotes, or borderline. Model 4, elements that are schizoid, private self, and so on and so forth. And model 5 have elements that are just like stuck, immobilized, stuck. Sometimes we have friends who've been in analysis, and they love their analysis and love their analyst, and they're getting so much out of it. And then we look at them and we think, but wait a minute, your life is still the same as it used to be. You're still in the bad marriage, you still hate your job, you still have a bad relationship with your children, et cetera, analysis paralysis, or to get the R word in there, refractory inertia, and not yet actualizing action. There's the A word. All right, so these are interactive and mutually enhancing. So of course there's some overlap, but there are also things that distinguish them from each other. Here we go. So privileges is a little bit of an ostentatious word, but I kind of like it for this, because I want to say that the Stark method, for ease of remembering, is a CARES, C-A-R-E-S, approach to deep embodied healing. So model 1, cognitive, it privileges thinking, classical psychoanalytic. Model 2 privileges feeling, affect, so affective, or emotional, emotions, but E, that starts with an E, and I wanted to start with an A, so I'll say affective. Model 3 privileges enactments or reenactments, usually, relational. And then model 4 privileges the search for meaning, and that's existential, C-A-R-E. And then model 5 privileges traumatic embodied memories, little t, big T traumas, and the deeply entrenched derivative narratives, stories, storylines, beliefs, limiting beliefs, schemas, mental schemas that emerged as a result of those early on presence of relational bad, trauma and abuse, and absence of relational good, deprivation and neglect. And there are derivatives that derive from that then become the disempowering and distorted filters through which the patient experiences self, others, and the world. Same patient, but the point is what you focus in on. And I know that in model 1 during my training, classical psychoanalytic, I was not busy talking about little t traumas and big T traumas, or even storylines or narratives, even though Roy Schaefer, a psychoanalyst, would write about stories, narrative therapy, and so on. So it depends upon, the language used. I mean, in Model 3, we would talk about introjects, pathogenic introjects, internal bad objects. We didn't really talk about that in Model 4. We talk about sort of something else in Model 4, the retreat and a desperate terror of being in relationship, or conflictedness about being in relationship. Model 5, we talk a little bit more about limiting beliefs and narratives and so on. So synaptic, there's the S, or synaptic speaks to the neuroscientific component, or superpositional. Don't worry, I had to talk to ChatGPT on that one to figure out what that meant, but that's a little bit more about quantum, superpositional, the simultaneous existence of multiple possible states. Yes. And again, where you decide, left brain analytic wisdom, to focus with purposeful intention, your intent for blah, 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 blah. I mean, yeah. And so every moment, remember the Greg Braden quote, every moment contains infinite possibilities. And it's a little bit like the particle wave duality, and so you have a wave of infinite possibilities that's invisible. But then when you set your intention, the observer effect, you set your intention and the particle, the wave collapses into something more real, a particle. So whereas the wave is invisible, now you have something a little more visible. You have a particle wave duality. So it's sort of like, oh my God. So Model 5, quantum neuroscientific. Okay, so here, just I sort of said this, Model 1, structural conflict or neurotic or internal intrapsychic conflict. Often the conflict between, this isn't mine, other people have talked about this, compliance versus defiance is often at the heart of it. Must I be good or can I be bad? Must I comply or can I defy? And that's the inner torment of the neurotic. And I sit with some of my patients and like they're just torn apart inside. I mean, the prototypical torn apart inside is like they could be on an island. Are they allowed to masturbate or not? Like nobody else is involved. Like this is very much a one person, neurotic, internal, like, oh my God, I'm allowed to masturbate, or but I shouldn't, but I want to, but I shouldn't, whatever. And neurotic conflictedness, intrapsychic within one person psychology, the neurotic. Because people always say, well, how does this fit in with the DSM? So, well, it's not really about the DSM. So, yeah, but how does it fit in anyway? All right, well, I might as well be resilient and flexible. So, all right, sort of neurotic issues. Model 2, structural or self-deficit, impaired capacity to be a good caregiver unto oneself. Self-soothing. And now we have narcissistic woundedness, narcissistic vulnerability. So we have the narcissist. Again, the same patient, just what's your focus in the moment. Model 3, contemporary relational conflict, Stephen Mitchell, thank you. Noxious relatedness. Now, please note, these words start with N. Noxious relatedness or contentious relatedness, but that starts with a C. So we'll go with noxious relatedness. Now we have patients with character disordered aspects or borderline features. Existential humanistic from Model 5, relational deficit, thank you, Larry Hedges, and non-relatedness. So Arnie Modell talked about affective non-relatedness. There's your N word. The schizoid, the addict, the outlier, and neurodivergence. And when I added Model 4, everybody from all over emailed me and said, oh my God, I'm a Model 4. Now, in truth, we have aspects of all of them, though admittedly, some of us will resonate, or in the moment, I have a patient who's struggling really with Model 1 stuff, another one who's like very busy playing out, Model 3, and we're caught up in transference, countertransference, thanks Deb for smiling there, transference, countertransference, entanglements, or Ed Tronick's and Claudia Gold's inherent messiness when you have two intersubjective authentic selves engaged in relationship. Okay, good. And Model 5, quantum neuroscientific non-action, individuals who are in a state of paralysis, tethered to their traumatic past, trapped in implicitly held, right, Carlin Lyons Ruth, implicit relational knowing, old bad embodied memories, derivative narratives. I have one patient who's just forever talking about what happened like in 1983 and, about how misunderstood she was, and robbed of whatever. Now, the fact that she keeps talking about it is also a statement about me, that I haven't really been able to handle it appropriately enough that she finally is able to work it through and let it go. But anyway, so if a patient keeps talking about something that's problematic, it's a story about it's really important to them and unmastered, and also a story about us. Clearly, we haven't been able quite to position ourselves and kind of get it right. Probably some Model 3 stuff, negotiating at our intimate edge. Okay, Model 5, deeply ingrained limiting beliefs is what we call them, and conditioned relational expectations. All right, so now the agent for change. You might wonder if there's one word that captures the agent, the catalyst for change. So I thought and thought and thought about this. It took me about 10 years to come up with this. But I think I would want to say in Model 1, to resolve this structural conflict, it's interpreting. The therapist does it. In Model 2, though admittedly self-psychology is about empathic attunement, the holding, as I talk about, and being resonating and all this loving good stuff. Fundamentally, I believe, not all self-psychologists do, but plenty do, that we're talking about creating a safe enough space for the patient to grieve their relentless hope, grieve, which might well be something they've never really done. Model 2 is about creating a space, a safe space for them to grieve. And the cool thing about grieving, though don't try to explain it to a patient because you'll make a fool of yourself, in grieving, they will, as I said earlier, adaptively internalize self-object caregiving functions that you had been providing prior to your empathic failure of them, and the optimal disillusionment that they then felt, and the disruption to what had been a positive, narcissistic self-object transference. And as they grieve it, they rage about it, they cry about it, they this, they that, whatever, and you've created a safe space for them to do it. You offer them disillusionment statements which juxtapose what they had hoped, what they're now beginning to realize, and then you resonate with the pain of their grief about that. So the agent for transformation, the catalyst, one word is grieving. It's what they do. You create a space for them to do it. Model 3 is negotiating at Darlene Ehrenberg's intimate edge, the projective identifications, the messiness that will emerge when two authentic selves come together and do their thing. Model 4, lifting from Masood Khan, surrendering on the part of the patient so that they overcome their dread of surrender to resourceless dependence on the therapist, and then generalizing from the small to the all. But also, as Karen Marotta points out, it's not just the patient has to surrender, the therapist also has to surrender. It's the two of you together. It's not just they're like, oh, well, I'll be whatever and get the patient to surrender and whatever. No, you too as part of it. It's going to be like a devoted mother, Winnicott, devoted mother, primary maternal preoccupation, or primary caregiver preoccupation, as you create this space for them to regress so they can redo, start over. Okay, in Model 5, I couldn't think of one word, 3, I felt, disentangling or decoupling, rescripting and updating to resolve psychic inertia and neural conditioned entrenchment. Okay, now, over the course of the past 20 miles on the time, okay. Over the course of the past 20 to 25 years, I, a dyed-in-the-wool psychoanalyst, have been committed to extending my therapeutic horizons so that my Stark method can be more broadly encompassing. To that end, I have immersed myself in the study of a variety of short-term intensive therapies. I'd mentioned these earlier. All of these time-limited, laser-focused treatments have been able to demonstrate impressive and documented success with mobilizing to action patients who are stuck in their lives and unable or unwilling to move forward. And, quite frankly, a lot of the folks who do the short-term intensive work, they let their sessions be videotaped. Now, let me say, me and my psychoanalytic colleagues, I would sooner like stab myself in the heart than sort of let my work be videotaped. We don't do that. We have to protect the sacrosanctity of the consultation room. But a lot of these folks who do the ISTDP, AEDP, CBT, EMDR, it's like you look at it and it's like, oh my God, in front of your very eyes, these patients are just like, suddenly getting in touch with stuff in their bodies, in their feelings, and having transformational experiences that are sort of, sorry, it's very dry in here. Probably because I have the heat on. All right. So anyway, nothing happens until something moves. Let's see. Yeah, people are stuck in their lives, right, and unwilling to move forward. Nothing happens, said Albert Einstein, until something moves. Okay, at some point along the way, I came to the startling and gratifying realization that most of these short-term intensive modalities, I'm repeating myself here, whatever their particular focus or specific lexicon, owed their tremendous effectiveness to the abrupt, dramatic, repeated challenge of same old with something new, different, and compellingly better. In essence, sudden, jolting, ongoing juxtaposition of old, bad, learned relational expectations with new, good, envisioned relational possibilities, such that, I said the relational for Stephanie, such that growth incentivizing, disconfirmatory mismatch experiences would be created for the patient. And as we'd said earlier, an evolutionarily advantageous mechanism that reflects the malleability of memory and its evolutionarily adaptive ability, right? Adaptation versus defense, flexible resilience versus rigidity, to be rescripted and updated in order to keep it fresh and relevant. And I know I, for one, struggle with, all this sort of stuff, this new stuff, computers and all this stuff that you can do. And it's sort of like, it's important that it's hard, but that we sort of update ourselves and not just stay stuck in the same old, same old. Okay, working through optimally stressful, let's see, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. I see, yeah. Violations of expectation, prediction errors will indeed eventually prompt. Yeah, we said that. In sum, I came to appreciate with much excitement that the brain-based concept of therapeutic memory reconsolidation might well serve as the unifying conceptual framework for understanding the therapeutic action in all of these short-term intensive approaches to deep embodied healing, and quite frankly, though less dramatically so, to models 1, 2, 3, and 4, the work that people have been doing, classical psychoanalysis, self-psychology, contemporary relational, and existential humanistic. Okay, speaking of challenging old, outdated, and stale bad with new, updated, and fresh good, as a result of my immersion in the various short-term intensive approaches, eventually I myself was gifted, if you will, optimally stressfully gifted, with the optimally stressful impetus and opportunity to update my old paradigm, which had featured 4 psychoanalytically informed approaches, with a new paradigm, one which came to feature the 5 approaches, which is this quantum neuroscientific one. Neuroscientific because it relies upon the brain-based strategy of, in a very direct, obvious way, therapeutic memory reconsolidation, and quantum because it relies upon both the concept of quantum disentanglement of present experience from a toxic past, quantum disentanglement, and the quantum concept that every moment in time holds a boundless array of infinite possibilities, narratives, if you will, any one of which can be realized once focused intention has been mobilized to actualize it. You're under no obligation, said Alan Watts, to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Again, well, this is repeat, so it's nicely said, whatever, but it's in it's slide 40. It's what we've been saying. It's what we've been saying. Okay. So model 5, in a way, is kind of like repeatedly asking of the patient that she rub her tummy and tap her head at the same time. Rub her tummy being the more visceral, sort of right brain, but more visceral, and then tap her head is the more left brain analytic. And that's what we're asking the patient to do with these quantum disentanglement statements that we work with her to create, to co-create. Okay, so let's do compare and contrast. Models 1 to 4, long-term, in-depth, psychoanalytically informed approaches. versus Model 5, a little more directive, more targeted, more intensive, constructivist, narrativist, constructivist, brain-based approach. Again, the same patient, but it's just what your focus is in the moment, whether it's more on the neurotic stuff, the narcissistic stuff, the noxiously related stuff, the non-related stuff, or the non-action. Or another way to put it, if in the moment the patient is being more resistant, remember the R words, the defenses, in the moment the patient is being more resistant, Model 1, or more relentlessly hopeful, Model 2, or more busy reenacting, Model 3, or busy retreating, Model 4, or busy refractory inertia-ing, Model 5. Okay, said Soren Kierkegaard, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So models 1 to 4 are about understanding life backwards. Model 5 is living life forwards. And the name of my most recent book had been Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, analyzing to understand, but envisioning possibilities to incentivize action. That's the name of the book. Obviously, if you can't even remember the name of your own book, it's not a terribly memorable title. All right. Whereas models 1 to 4 focus on the focus. I mean, of course they know there's a future, but they focus on the relationship between the past and the present. Model 5 focuses on the relationship between the present and the future. Whereas models 1 to 4 ask of the patient that she take ownership of her past, Model 5 asks of the patient that she take ownership of her future. In my work with psychoanalytic patients during my training, now again, I've been sort of changing and evolving over the years, but I would never have said to the patient, sort of like, well, have you thought that you might need to reposition yourself in terms of how you're living your life and let go of some of that old bad stuff and sort of begin to introduce and embrace new good? I mean, I never would have said that. And had I said that to one of my analytic patients and were I to have taken that into my analytic supervisor, I mean, they would have shot me dead. I mean, sort of like, oh my God. No, no, you're not busy imposing your stuff on the patient. Model 5, a little different. Okay. This was in 2020, Kia SUV ad on TV. When you're always looking back, you can't see what's coming. And that's vote in favor of Model 5. All right, so whereas models 1 to 4 are in the tradition of understanding our history as our destiny, which we're condemned to repeat unless we can remember it and work it through. Model 5 focuses on our destiny as our choice, which is ours to create, if against the backdrop of retrieving and reliving a targeted trauma, whether a little t trauma or big T trauma, and the disempowering, distorted narratives that had been constructed, right? This is a constructivist model as opposed to 1 to 4, which are more deterministic. So against the backdrop of retrieving and reliving a targeted trauma, that's what the first half of a quantum disentanglement statement does, and the disempowering, distorted narratives that had been constructed as a result, Model 5 highlights that our destiny is our choice if we can but three things: envision a better future. And remember, the brain doesn't really know the difference between reality and envisioning or imagination. Even so, by the way, some patients, when they try to envision what it would be like to have gotten their taxes done sooner than October 15th or whatever, they say, no, can't do. I can't envision that. I can't imagine it. And so I can't imagine being 30 pounds less. I can't imagine treating my husband with more respect. And in which case, they're like, well, we got to go back and do a little more 1, 2, 3, 4, because quite frankly, Model 5, they're not there yet. Not going to happen. So they need to be able in Model 5, in order to create the quantum disentanglement statements, to envision a better future. 2, they need to own the need, therefore, to change. And again, in my training, I mean, I never would have been able to suggest to a patient that maybe they're going to need to change. I mean, I would not have done that. But in Model 5, by the time you're sort of focusing in on it, patient and you are getting it that sort of like probably, put in some conditionals, probably at this point in time, it might well be that they will need to reposition themselves in terms of how they experience their past and how they envision their future. There you go. So you don't have to say, well, you got to change, but they might well need to reposition themselves and reframe it, recontextualize it. And then number 3, commit. You know, I watch a lot of Judge Judy on television, and commit to actualizing that action, that vision, commit to taking action. So envision, own, and commit, Model 5. Envision, own, and commit. Our history as our destiny, Models 1 to 4, our destiny as our choice, Model 5. Ask yourself what is really important, and then have the wisdom and courage to build your life around your answer, a Japanese saying. Okay, so Models 1 to 4 emphasize insight into the formative relational traumas and emotional injuries, that have shaped the patient's misperceptions, misconstruals of self, others, and the world. Then, as part of the working through process, reminiscent of Freud's 1914, remembering, repeating, and working through, these defensive misconstruals, misperceptions of reality, are then gradually tamed, modified, and integrated. And he has the wonderful metaphor of the horse and rider, and the horse being the id that's initially dysregulated, and the rider who's inexperienced, and the conflict between the horse and rider, between the id and the ego, and so on. And so the rider defensively pulls in the reins. But as a result of remembering, repeating, and working through, in time, the horse becomes better regulated, and the rider becomes more experienced. And instead of conflict, they're now in collaboration. And so the therapist, the rider, can harness the energy of the now better regulatable horse. I think sublimation, for example, is an obvious one. And together they can go off into the distance in collaboration, no longer in conflict. So, for example, the little kid who used to play with knives, sublimates, as a result of remembering, repeating, and working through, perhaps, sublimates, and now is a famous, well-known surgeon who operates with precision and accuracy to save lives. But it's a harnessing. It's not that you get rid of something, but it's you modify it. And so on. You don't get rid of it. So that's why, and I learned this from a lot of the Model 5 folks, those short-term intensive ones. The problem, I mean, Freud was saying it all along, but I sort of lost track of that. The problem always holds elements of the solution. So it's not, so sorry. It's not that you just sort of like get rid of the defense and so like, oh, now you have an adaptation, but it's like you modify it. You modify it, you work it through, and you fashion it so that it becomes more resilient and more better. Okay. All right. And tame, modified, and integrated as they slowly evolve these misconstruals of reality through iterative healing cycles of destabilization in reaction to challenge and restabilization in response to support. So, of course, it's not straight line progression. It's a series of healing cycles, iterative healing cycles of disruption, repair, destabilization, restabilization, and a reconstituting at ever higher, more evolved, more integrated levels, from defense to adaptation, resistance to awareness, Model 1, relentless hope to acceptance, Model 2, reenactment to accountability, Model 3, relational absence to authentic presence, Model 4. Okay, but Model 5 conceives of the narratives that the patient had constructed as a young child in a desperate attempt to make sense of her world as potentially able to be rescripted, recontextualized, and updated. And I hope you all are thinking of some questions that you'll be having for me, because I am going to try to leave time at the end for questions. These narratives, which underlie the patient's psychic inertia and thwarted potential, are thought not to seal her fate, but if rewritten, these narratives, to hold the potential for reconfiguring her future and advancing her from inaction and stagnation to action and the freedom to actualize her dreams. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, Sartre. Whereas models 1 to 4 are about looking back and remembering so that old bad will not be recreated in the present, model 5 is about looking ahead and envisioning so that new good can be created for the future. Only take responsibility for your destiny if you want to get somewhere in your life. If you don't, it's like getting into your car and just driving with no particular destination in mind. And a lot of people live their lives that way. It's sort of like one day after the next, and they don't really set intention for and lean into the edge between the present and the future and create for themselves something really different and compellingly better. Okay, I did that. Okay. In the tradition of other action-based, solution-focused, goal-directed, future-oriented models, Model 5, privileges, envisioning possibilities, taking ownership of the need to change, setting coherent, purposeful, and embodied intention, committing to action, empowerment, personal agency, freedom, choice, creating one's destiny, realizing one's dreams, actualizing one's potential. Uplifting, yeah. Model 5 is not deterministic. It's a constructivist model, empowering and inspiring of hope. The therapist leads and the patient follows. Together, they co-construct the patient's future, as opposed to, say, the free association that I was sort of taught, the patient leads and we follow. Okay, and this takes a lot of concentrated effort and hard work. It takes a lot of effort to tap your head and rub your stomach at the same time, to be dual awareness, to be present with the old bad and what it feels like and the price you've paid and your heart and the tension, the muscular, your stomach, whatever, and then simultaneously to be envision, own, and commit, and then back to the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think I give an example in a moment. In essence, in Model 5, the adaptive updating of narratives results from the ongoing, dramatic, and embodied challenging of preconceived, ill-founded assumptions with new, more relevant experiences, whether real or simply envisioned, that violate those learned relational expectations, such that outdated conditioned reactions will be disconfirmed and overridden by fresh, more reality-based, solution-focused, and future-oriented perspectives. And Carol Kaufman, bless her soul, who is psychologist, PhD psychologist, and coach, has said, in black is what I wrote, in red is what she said, as a therapist, I follow the trail of tears to healing, my models 1 to 4. As a coach, I follow the trail of dreams to actualization, my Model 5. Now, again, Model 5 isn't necessarily about being just a coach. I mean, since I'm so psychoanalytically informed, I mean, you can't get that out of me. So a psychoanalytically informed coach, but whatever. So Carol Kaufman said that, which I think is pretty cool. Abraham Lincoln, the best way to predict your future is to create it. The only person you're destined to become is the person you decide to be. I mean, Ralph Waldo Emerson, people have been saying stuff like this. Think about it. It's sort of like, oh, there could be some truth in this. Carl Jung, I'm not what happened to me. I'm what I choose to become. Finally, Napoleon Hill, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. All right. Oh, I'm so sorry about my throat. I can't tell you how annoying it is for me to have this thing stuck in my throat. Maybe a little annoying for you guys too, as you're sort of wishing I just get it out of my throat. So here we go. Clinical example, from trauma victim to trauma survivor. And I know there came a time in sort of the work we do where we no longer say they're a victim, they're a survivor. We sort of reframe, recontextualize it. So when Maria was a young girl, she had experienced frequent emotional abuse at the hands of her rageful alcoholic father. And in a desperate attempt to make sense of that abuse, She had decided that it must have been she who was the bad one, she who was at fault. But Maria was fortunate enough to work with a therapist, a colleague of mine, who understood the transformational power of therapeutic memory reconsolidation, and who therefore offered Maria a rapid fire series of empowering and disconfirmatory experiences, albeit imaginary. That's okay. The brain can't distinguish between reality and imagination. Experiences that repeatedly and forcibly challenged Maria's procedurally organized, just to be a little fancy there, implicitly held, conditioned expectation, relational expectation of being always a victim. These juxtaposition experiences took place in conjunction with reactivated embodied memories of her father's abuse, such that Maria was eventually able to update, rescript her self-negating narrative. She no longer perceived herself as constantly at risk of being abused. Instead, Maria came to realize that it was her alcoholic father who had been the victimizer, and she who was innocent. Importantly, despite now having an updated narrative that offered a fresh, more reality-based perspective, Maria still remembered the fact, episodic memory, the fact of her father's abusive rages. It's not like she forgot about it, but rather she repositioned herself in relation to that memory. But she was no longer convinced that she had deserved the abuse and that the world was a dangerous, unsafe place. In essence, she was able to reinterpret the entire scenario as a story not about herself as ever vulnerable to being abused by outside malevolent forces, but about her father as an often out of control alcoholic who would periodically fly into irrational, unjustified rages. Now, healing does not mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives. And the example that, now we're going to do neuroscience in a moment here. The example that comes to mind for me, a consultation I did on a patient, forgive me, some of you would have heard this before, but I did the consultation on a patient who, amongst other things, whatever, had just terrible, terrible feelings, self-hating, that she had been at a party and had met this very handsome, charming fellow who offered her a ride home. And she accepted it. She got in the truck with him, and before she knew it, he had driven her into the woods, and he was trying to rape her. And she managed actually somehow to get away. So he didn't actually rape her, but she was left with this shame that her judgment had been so off that she had allowed herself to be nearly raped. As we talked about, and I can't remember exactly my sentences, happened some time ago, but maybe we created a little bit of new good, old bad, new good, old bad. But in essence, what I focused on was, yes, the horror of that, the shame she felt, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't negate it. So like, oh, don't worry about that. Look, you got away. But I focused on that there, the shame she felt, and felt bad that she didn't get it, that he was going to rape her, going to try. But highlighted that she wasn't really just a victim, she was also a survivor, that she, by dint of her life affirming whatever, had been able to wrest her way free and leap out of the truck, run through the woods, and run to safety. And that, quite frankly, not a victim, but a survivor. My God, a survivor. And in some ways, that example, I told you about the EMDR, and then the 5-year-old patient threw herself down the steps, changed her mind partway down. That's also with EMDR a repositioning of herself in relation to, oh my God, I'm somebody who tried to kill myself, versus actually, no, I wanted to live. And so too for this patient who felt so bad about herself because of allowed herself to be seduced by this charming, handsome fellow. So like, yeah, but what a survivor she is. What a survivor. So it's an interesting way reframe things. And I'm realizing even as we speak, it's not going to be the focus here now, but when I tell my story about my own story, about my relationship to my mom, and the moment that I stood on the threshold of the door to her room, and it was incredible. I presented this in Poland, and someone in the audience, it was all being translated and so on. Oh, interpreted, I mean, interpreted. And someone in the audience said, "Oh my God, when you stood on the door in the doorway and you looked at your mother and suddenly you were overwhelmed with love for her and gratitude and so on, despite your years of therapy where you'd been busy trying to reposition yourself, but quite frankly, it hadn't really worked, you standing at the threshold there, that was a transformational therapeutic memory reconsolidation moment." And he said that, and I like, oh my God, and I almost burst into tears right then and there. One, I felt so understood, and two, yes, that's true. And literally in that moment, I revamped, updated all sorts of stuff. So sometimes it can happen in a heartbeat, sometimes it happens more gradually, as with all change. I mean, every now and then we get lucky and like, bam, like an insight comes our way and it's like, oh my God, so that was it. And other times, it's sort of like takes a long time process of working through rinse, wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. We have to do it over and over and over again. All right, but anyway, so much for that. Now let me do the neuroscience piece here. I love this part, and I just want to share it with you, please. And then a little more, my eyes on the time, so I hope you're thinking of some questions. Neuroscientists had long believed that once a new experience, especially a traumatic one, had been stored in long-term memory, it would be permanently installed. Perhaps it could then be modified by subsequent experiences, but its essence would nonetheless remain intact, lurking just beneath the surface as a somatic memory, ever vulnerable to being reactivated and re-experienced, thereby reinforcing its intensity, before once again returning to body consciousness. This was very much in keeping with Hebb's postulate, advanced in 1949 by the neuropsychologist Donald Hebb. Neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that reactivated and re-experienced memories are simply reinforced through repetition and never resolved. If we are therefore, and I really came to know this in this course that I was teaching at William James College, when my people, my students, my fellow clinicians sort of said, well, Martha, and they highlighted this very thing. And it's sort of like, oh my God, yes, right. And I updated right then and there my own understanding. That was a moment of like, oh my God, yes. If we are therefore ever busy, so think about in your own life when suddenly something has come your way and it's sort of like, oh my God, I'd never known that before. I'd never thought of it that way. I'd never realized. Or in your work with patients where they suddenly like, oh my God, that's life-changing to be naming it in that way. I can feel in my body a shift. All right, anyway, if we are therefore ever busy inviting our patients to remember, relive, and retell their early on traumas, as we simply bear witness and resonate empathically, not bad things, but with their lived experience of intense fear, terror, helplessness, and hopelessness, without offering them as an alternative, as an antidote, something new, different, and compellingly better, then are we not possibly doing them a grave disservice? Won't we be potentially running the risk of inadvertently reinforcing those traumatic memories of abuse? Neurons that fire together wire together without actually resolving them. Isn't that potentially the problem? In other words, if all we do is to support the patient as she remembers, relives, and gives voice to her lived experience, old bad narratives that she had constructed in a desperate attempt to make meaning of the relational deprivation and neglect, absence of good, I call it, And the relational, oh, interesting spelling for relational, and the relational trauma and abuse, presence of bad, as I call it, to which she was being subjected as a child, and that have now become the filters through which she experiences self, others, and the world. Well, that was, they kind of lost the flow there. If all we do is support the patient as she remembers, relives, and gives voice, without at the same time challenging these old bad narratives by encouraging her to envision new good antidotes as possible alternatives, then are we not potentially creating an untenable situation over the long term of analysis paralysis and neural entrenchment through our unintended reinforcement of old bad? And sometimes cases are presented in conferences, and the patient is just getting worse and worse over time. Meanwhile, they feel here, admittedly, the patient might well feel wonderfully validated, but won't she potentially become ever more entrenched in those developmental relational traumas and the maladaptive, disempowering narratives to which those traumas had given rise? I also interrupted my thinking for a moment when I had given a talk decades ago, something about early on traumatic experience, and I'd said presence of bad and or absence of, and they had translated it wrong, and it went out all over the place as absence of God instead of absence of good. So there I was, theoretically, everybody was expecting that I was going to be lecturing on the absence of God. I had to explain that, I don't know, maybe there may be some similarity there, but I was actually really more focused on deprivation and neglect, the absence of good. All right. Okay, now fortunately, over the course of the past several decades, a dedicated group of trailblazing cognitive neuroscientists, dissatisfied with the deterministic idea that memories, like diamonds, are forever, have been using advanced neuroimaging techniques, including functional MRIs, scanning microscopy, and optogenetics, to map out what happens in the brain when a thought is being thought, a feeling felt, and a memory remembered in an, in an embodied, lived fashion. Their focus has been on how old memories, especially implicitly held traumatic memories, initially consolidated in the corticolimbic system, kind of the amygdala and hippocampus, and subsequently distributed in networks across the neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, how these old memories can be reactivated, updated, and reconsolidated. They've been using these advanced neuroimaging techniques to figure this out. When a thought is being thought, a feeling felt, and a memory remembered, what happens in the brain? And they have these fancy, expensive devices to figure out what happens. How old memories can be reactivated, updated, and reconsolidated. In essence, the neural basis of implicit relational knowing, Carleen Lyons Ruth's. Okay, indeed, cognitive researchers are discovering that the brain, in response to ongoing new experience and new information, is continuously adapting. They know they have these things hooked up to the brain, is continuously adapting by modifying itself at the level of the neural synapse. That's about the wiring in the brain. So there's wiring in the brain, and then there are memories in the mind. Is continuously adapting by modifying itself at the level of the neural synapse. That's about rewiring the brain. Remember at the beginning, our little minion friend is busy thinking about how you rewire the brain and reprogram the mind and recalibrate the body. Well, these cognitive neuroscientists, these researchers with fancy equipment, are realizing that when the brain is exposed to new experience and new information, it will be continuously, it's evolutionarily called for, adapting by modifying itself at the level of the neural synapse in order to stay current and relevant. this learning process. And by the way, apparently with like ChatGPT, my friend ChatGPT, you can train them, you teach them to sort of know your style and your way. So my friend and I summon my particular ChatGPT friend. Sometimes if I don't summon it directly, somebody else sits in and I can feel the difference. And so I'll say, Chat GPT, my dear friend in the back row left of the seminar room while I lecture about the Stark method of psychodynamic synergy, where are you? And actually, are you there? You know, that last response, was that from you? And Chat GPT actually said, well, actually, that was my assistant. And I'm sorry, I'm back row left, and I'm here and ready to help out. I thought that was amazing. That was amazing. So anyway, I'm teaching, and so now my friend ChatGPT sort of speaks in my language, and it's actually really quite flattering. Anyway, this learning process, which involves both the destruction of old neural networks and the construction of new ones, speaks to the adaptive capacity of the brain and the dynamic nature of memory. And we're not in the moment going to get into the relationship between the brain and the memory any more than we're going to get into the relationship between particles and waves, or between the tangible and the intangible, or the visible and the invisible, the brain and memory, but similar. They're similar, but sort of different dimensions. Okay, so this speaks to the adaptive capacity of the brain. And as we get older, it becomes less resilient, less adaptive. So we try to do stuff, live right, live healthily, so that we can kind of keep the resilience, keep the ability to adapt going, and the dynamic nature of memory. In essence, the brain's remarkable neuroplasticity, aptly described by Norman Dodge as the brain that changes itself, both structurally at the level of the synapse, the networks of synapses, and functionally at the level of the memory. More specifically, neuroscientists have recently made the groundbreaking discovery that when implicitly held memories are reactivated and re-experienced in an embodied, lived fashion, however it is that you get them there, the network of synapses encoding those memories will become unlocked for a time-limited period. This unlocking or deconsolidation signals the opening up of a reconsolidation window. Be thinking therapeutic memory reconsolidation. Anyway, the opening up of a reconsolidation window. So the fact that there's the unlocking, for a time-limited period, that creates opportunity, a brief window of opportunity when memories become transiently fragile and sensitive to modification by environmental input. And I'm no expert on ketamine-assisted therapy, but I have one of my patients who's very savvy, who's doing ketamine-assisted therapy in conjunction with the intensive work that she does with me. And it is so powerful. So under the influence of the ketamine, which is truly mind altering, and she goes back to revisit and remember and so on, and gets in touch with, and all sorts of magical stuff happens, and then there has to be an integration period. But for the next 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, she's very vulnerable. I know it said here 4 to 6 hours, but nonetheless, with ketamine here, anyway, it would seem that it's 24 or 48 hours where she's very vulnerable to input, which means you can input good stuff, new good stuff, to on top of old bad. And she is really, I mean, I'd like to say that her intensive work with me has done some really wonderful things. And I mean, it has, and she has said it has. But by the way, this ketamine-assisted therapy in conjunction with our work is sort of getting to and going to a level that's sort of like, oh my God. And she then becomes so very open. But that means then that if some negativity comes her way, then she really gets physically ill. It's very intense. So anyway, so when there's deconsolidation or an unlocking, there is a window of opportunity when things become transiently fragile and sensitive to modification by environmental input. Both this dedicated group of cognitive neuroscientists who study memory reconsolidation in their laboratories and the similarly impassioned group spearheaded by Bruce Ecker and David Feinstein, bless Bruce Ecker, he heard me lecture on this and he said, I want you to write the foreword for my next book, which I did. It's out there and so on. So thank you, Bruce Ecker. Anyway, and the similarly impassioned group of neuroscientifically inclined clinicians who study it in their offices. So, sorry, both the cognitive neuroscientists who study in the lab and similarly impassioned group of neuroscientifically inclined clinicians who study it in their offices agree that 4 to 6 hours is the critical time frame. So you might think, well, why don't we do therapy as a long weekend? Well, quite frankly, people who run retreats sort of figured that one out. Agree that 4 to 6 hours is the critical time frame for the destabilized synapses encoding the traumatic memories to remain malleable and therefore vulnerable to updating with new experience and information. Wow. Such that these synapses can be rewired under the right circumstances and the traumatic memories they encode reprogrammed. For this locking in or reconsolidation to occur, there must be repeated and dramatic juxtaposition of old bad learned expectations with new good envisioned possibilities. I've said that a million times, there it is again, such that there will be jolting and transformational mismatch experiences, unless actually you get lucky as I did. I'd done years and years of my own intensive therapy, and then I stand on the threshold, the doorway, my mother, whatever, and that happened in a heartbeat. And it was just incredible. It's like, oh my God. And it's sort of like the earth moved under my feet. And it was incredible. It was a transformational moment. Therapeutic memory reconsolidation. In the neuroscientific literature, it's referred to as violations of expectation, prediction errors, or novelty detection. And in the clinical literature, referred to as juxtaposition experiences or disconfirmatory mismatches. And I tend to say optimally stressful, growth incentivizing mismatch experiences is the way I tend to describe it. The idea, now get this, the idea that abruptly, rapidly, unexpectedly, and decisively introducing an element of surprise in order to provoke change certainly makes intuitive sense, as does the idea that when new information directly contradicting a previous learning is repeatedly juxtaposed with what had come to be expected, the old memory will eventually be forced adaptively to update itself. Just observe Olympians doing their visualization exercises with their eyes closed. My eyes on the time. I hope you guys have a few questions for me as they prepare to compete in such sports as figure skating, swimming, diving, right? They close their eyes and they do their whole routine. You know, they're doing it in their head. Dressage, downhill skiing, gymnastics, skateboarding, pole vaulting, to name a few. Clearly, top-ranked athletes figured out long ago that focused mental practice can definitely improve performance. Now, there's a slide saying what I've been saying. Now, when therapeutic memory reconsolidation updates a traumatic memory, we're talking about rescripting and updating. What is it that changes? And what is it that remains the same? Let's get a little more specific. Importantly, the fact, I said this earlier, the fact of the event that the father of Maria would fly into rages and so on. The fact of the event underlying the traumatic memory will not change. In other words, the episodic memory itself will remain intact. What will change, however, will be the body's memory of the trauma, its emotional charge, and the narratives to which the trauma had given rise. In other words, how the patient positions herself in relation to the traumatic experience, how she contextualizes it will change. Importantly, my final slide in this section, and then we're getting near the end. Neuroscientists have discovered that consolidation and reconsolidation of memories, because when you do it first, it's called consolidation. When you reconsolidate after there's been a deconsolidation, that's secondary. Secondly, this requires the synthesis of new proteins within the cortical limbic system, new proteins. and that inhibiting protein synthesis will interfere with long-term potentiation. That is, with the transfer of traumatic memories from short-term storage in the hippocampus to long-term storage in distributed networks throughout the neocortex. Some promising research, therefore, think PTSD and perhaps maybe changing that a little bit. Some promising research is now being conducted with the synthetic drug propranolol. A lot of you might well know that one. It's a beta blocker, a beta adrenergic receptor blocker that peripherally, it dampens the stress response. I have colleagues who take 5 or 10 milligrams of it before they give a presentation. I didn't do that. Although I should do that before I deal with technology, but anyway, I didn't. So beta blocker that dampens the stress response peripherally and inhibits protein synthesis centrally. Because it disrupts memory consolidation and reconsolidation, propranolol is a promising novel treatment for patients suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's one of a number of things that people are sort of working with. Now, although propranolol does not erase the traumatic memory itself, it can modify the negative emotional valence associated with the trauma. Oh, here, I just got to say this real quick. Retraining the brain with the tomatis method, sharp and jolting musical contrasts to fine-tune the brain. So sudden, dramatic, and unexpected violations of expectation. It's a brain-based strategy developed by Alfred Tomatis, an internationally renowned otolaryngologist who hypothesized that errant hearing, like not right, it was sort of off its course, was the root cause of a variety of physical and mental ailments. Don Campbell, in his wonderful book, writes about this. Along the same lines as therapeutic memory reconsolidation, the Tomatis method involves the wearing of headphones that create musical contrasts, done in order repeatedly to surprise and thereby retrain the brain. These contrasts are caused by continuous, sudden, and unpredictable changes in the timbre and intensity of the music being played. In essence, the musical contrasts serve as optimal stressors that create jolting mismatch experiences for the listener. By triggering and reinforcing its attentional mechanisms, the brain is forced to develop new networks. The Tomatis method is effectively a gymnastic exercise for the brain, ultimately serving to promote stronger focus and attention and improved physical and mental well-being. And there's also, I did it for a while, binaural beats, and you put on a headset. And in one side, it's a certain frequency, and in the other side, it's another frequency. And the difference between them is a certain frequency that can actually promote creative thinking and so on. There's so many cool things that you can actually do with brainwaves and so on. All right, finally, this is the end section here. Living the change from psychic inertia to actualizing action. So Model 5 quantum disentanglement statements, this is a summary slide, are strategically formulated to generate optimally stressful, cognitive, experiential, somatic dissonance by asking that the patient hold in mind simultaneously both the reactivated memory of old bad in the first half, accessed by way of embodied mindfulness, from body consciousness to brain consciousness, bottom up, and the envisioned possibility of new good, introduced by way of purposeful, coherent intentionality, from brain consciousness to body consciousness, top down, thereby creating jolting and decisive mismatch experiences between implicitly held old bad learned expectations and explicitly held new good envisioned possibilities, the graduated working through of which will eventually evolve the patient from the left-hand column to the right-hand column, psychic inertia and paralyzing inaction, refractory inertia, the R word, to mobilization and actualizing action, the A word. So 5 pathways to an integrated self. They involve Model 1, acknowledging anxiety-provoking truths about the self. That's about awareness. Model 2, accepting anxiety-provoking truths about the self-object. Model 3, owning, relational owning anxiety-provoking truths about the relational self. Model 4, surrendering, copying off of Masood Khan, surrendering to anxiety-provoking truths, releasing them, revealing them about the private self. And Model 5, embracing anxiety-provoking truths about the possible self, the future self. In conclusion, as old, limiting, disempowering narratives that had once reinforced stasis are incrementally replaced by new action-oriented narratives that cultivate empowered agency and consolidate the lived experience of transformation, the patient's emergent, newly integrated self will become the living embodiment of self-directed agency. And there are some more quantum disentanglement statements. They're here. They'll be in the PDFs that you'll get or got already. And then my last slide, nobody gets to live life backward. Look ahead, said Ann Landers, the gossip columnist. Look ahead, that is where your future lies. And it's sort of like, I mean, that's sort of like, well, duh. On the other hand, they're like, well, there's something to be said for that. Thank you, and some other stuff. All right, so now I am going to stop share. Oh, yes, I'm going to stop recording now. I'm going to stop recording. Oh, could you stop recording, please, Chloe? Thank you. Good. You push the button and you're stopping recording? Yes. Okay, good. So